Welcome to the Helping Conversation, an exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of facilitating trusting, safe, inclusive, and effective helping conversations with others. Recorded at RockVox Recording and Production Studios, Rochester, New York. Mouth off at RockVox, rockvox.com. Having enjoyed an almost 40-year career facilitating his own authentic brand of the helping conversation, your host, Executive and Recovery Coach, Keith Greer.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to sit in with us today on this episode of the Helping Conversation. I'm recording this the week of Veterans Day, and so an important conversation to be had today and a very special guest in relation to our recognition this week for all those that have served our country. I did a little research leading up to the conversation that we're going to have today, and I shouldn't have been surprised by this, but I guess in some ways I was. I went online and took a look at what in the United States, our entire Department of Defense budget is, and then looked at what proportion of it goes to veterans. And I found myself feeling pretty worried that, at least from my math, only 35% of the budget is designated for veteran services. And there's something about that feels not right and out of proportion. And I don't want to get into the politics of our defense. And I know that we need that. But we seem to be spending a lot more on the acts of war than on making sure that the people who go and keep us safe and come back and have some needs, that those needs are met. So what are some of the issues that our veterans are dealing with these days? A variety of different health concerns, from traumatic brain injuries to post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, substance use disorder, and thoughts of suicide. And many veterans come back with dealing with more than one of those conditions. In addition, for many women and men, there's experience with sexual trauma, including harassment and assaults while in the military. And so we do have the Veterans Health Administration, and many would say that their care is as good or better than that provided by many private or other public facilities. But the accessibility and quality of services vary across the system. Studies have shown, for example, that a large number of veterans don't receive any treatment following diagnoses of PTSD, substance use disorder, or depression. Many veterans don't know how to apply for veterans' mental health care benefits, are unsure if they're eligible, or are unaware that mental health care benefits are available. Other barriers include difficulty getting to medical facilities because of their inconvenient location or lack of transportation, concerns about taking time off of work and potentially harming their career, and fear of discrimination, as we know, especially in the world of mental illness, substance use disorder, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. There is a great deal of stigma that will leave people from ever pursuing any kind of intervention. And so I would like to spend a little time today talking about how we can bring the skills of the helping conversation to the fore when it involves working with and supporting our veterans. So please join me. I'm so pleased in welcoming into the studio Laura Stradley. And let me tell you a little bit about who Laura is. Laura is an Army veteran who spent 8 years on active duty, during which time she was stationed in Korea, Fort Benning, Fort Rucker in Germany. While in Germany, she was deployed to Bosnia in support of Operation Stabilization Force. Just before leaving the service, Laura earned her Master of Science degree in Business Administration from Baker College. Since the military, Laura has worked with veterans in a number of capacities, including transition assistance counseling, higher education, helping veterans at risk for or experiencing homelessness, and then directing the Monroe County Veterans Service Agency from 2012 to 2017 here in Rochester, New York area. After serving on the board of directors at the Veterans Outreach Center for 3 years, Laura became the executive director in September 2017. In 2015, Laura was inducted into the New York State Veterans Hall of Fame. In 2019, she was named a Woman of Excellence by the Rochester Business Journal during their annual awards gala. She's been a Girl Scout troop leader for the last 7 years. She sits on numerous community boards and committees and has co-authored 2 books. I love the names of these. The Pocket Idiot's Guide to the ASVAB, which is the military entrance exam, and the Complete Idiot's Guide to the ASVAB. So again, please join me in welcoming Laura Stradley to the Helping Conversation.
Thanks for having me today.
So glad you're here, especially during this week, given that we are just on earlier in the week celebrated Veterans Day. So I know that the Veterans Outreach Center is an absolute jewel in the Rochester area, but I would imagine a lot of people, even in our area, aren't very aware of what VOC is, what VOC does, how many people. And as I'm always interested with my guests in just a little bit of starting with from the beginning. So you're presently the executive director. Fill us in a little bit on what the journey has been to get to that point.
Yeah. So, I'm glad that you opened the segment by talking a little bit about the discrepancy between how much money is spent in veteran services versus on the DoD budget itself for our service members. And I think that kind of parlays into how we got started at Veterans Outreach Center as a nonprofit organization. In 1973, our returning Vietnam veterans were neither welcomed home, which was just an atrocity, but even for those that were welcomed home, the system wasn't set up to receive them. And so, unfortunately, a lot of that hasn't changed because of the way Congress defines the rules for people to receive services from the VA. And so, even since that time period, we still see that on average, the Department of Veterans Affairs only enrolls probably 26 to 30% of the eligible or of the men and women who have served their country post-service.
26%.
Right. And so, the fact that they're not getting the full 100% means that there's 74% out there who are just kind of, on their own after military service. And for some people, that's okay. They move back home, they pick up jobs and careers where they left off and reunite with families. But for other people, that transition doesn't go as smoothly. And so for the last 47 years, the Veterans Outreach Center has really been instrumental in our community in helping folks bridge that gap. And so whether they have just come home from military service or whether it's been 50 years, but they're still struggling with the transition. And sometimes I think people don't even really fully understand where all that comes from. They know they've had some failed marriages and they've been, had a hard time keeping a job, but they can't really put their finger on why that's happening. They come to the Veterans Outreach Center and they get all the service, all the support they need. We help veterans with meaningful job placements, which means, not just into some minimum wage job, but we help them get training. We help them find careers after the military. Last year, we helped 226 veterans find employment in this community. That made about a $6 million economic impact in our community. We also have all kinds of other, peer support programs. We've got hydromassage, massage therapy, and the reason why some of that's important too is a lot of veterans experience chronic pain and, again, mental health issues. That hydromassage is a really nice alternative for folks who may not be comfortable with having somebody actually put their hands on them. They can still get the benefits of massage through that modality instead. We've got a barbershop, laundry services, homeless shelters. We have the first ever permanent supportive housing complex in our community serving exclusively veterans, and that's called Liberty Landing. We just opened that earlier this year. So, there's probably nothing that somebody could think of that we either don't have or don't know how to find for a veteran. Right.
And the important point here seems to be, or among the important points, is you are a separate entity from the VA.
That's right. Yeah, we're a nonprofit organization, and what I love about that is, sometimes we'll just be sitting, having conversations with our staff, and I'll say, well, what do we need? What have you guys heard that veterans are coming in for and asking for that we're not doing? And of course, when the pandemic first hit, a lot of people said, well, now that everything's virtual, our veterans, a lot of them don't have the technology at home that they need to be able to network with employers and to be able to connect with sober support systems and with, telehealth. And so I said, well, so what do we need? We need tablets, we need laptops. Well, we think tablets would work. So we wrote a grant and we got overnight, I mean, literally inside of about a month and a half, we got 50 tablets that we handed out to our most vulnerable veterans. And we also were able to write into that grant internet connectivity. So for folks that, couldn't afford to have internet service, now they have that as well.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
That's awesome.
Great.
So I always get curious with my guests because as I often say on here, I do not believe it's a coincidence that those of us in the helping profession are in the helping profession. Yeah. So if we would go back to when you were a kid, as you look back on that time, what was the evidence then in terms of how you thought, things you were involved in, your interaction with others, that was maybe some evidence that you were eventually going to be in the helping world?
Well, as you mentioned in my bio, I am a Girl Scout troop leader. I was a Girl Scout as a kid. But what stands out probably even more in my mind is watching the Jerry Lewis telethon when I was little. I don't know if anybody else remembers that.
I think we're showing our age right here.
Probably so. So for anybody who's listening and is not familiar, that was a telethon on Labor Day every year, and it supported, I think, mostly children, but people with muscular dystrophy. And it really, I guess, struck my heart when I was little that there were children out there who didn't have the same capabilities as I had. And so I would take my babysitting money or whatever, I might have gotten for my birthday. And I think the first time I made a donation myself, I was maybe 8 or 9.
That's awesome.
And then, of course, they sent me the letters after that, and I kept, supporting them with my little $10 donations.
Yeah.
But and then as I got into high school, I got involved with Camp Good Days and Special Times, which for some of our local listeners,
Right.
helps children with cancer. And I really enjoyed those experiences of volunteering and helping people in need.
Yeah. What then led to the decision, and I don't know at what age, but your decision to go into the military?
Well, probably not as much thinking as you might imagine for something that big. So, unfortunately, when I was in 9th grade, my mother passed away from cancer. When I got into end of 11th grade, beginning of 12th grade, my father got diagnosed with cancer. So I really kind of was not envisioning a big future for myself outside of my home area, because I thought I'd need to be there to take care of him. And initially that was true, but then he started to do very well. He responded well to the treatments. And so I was kind of left with this not very exciting college plan. I was going to go to the local community college, but my dad and I were watching a special on PBS about Army bands, and I was a musician, and he had just gotten out of the hospital, and he said, "Boy, Laura, you should do that. You should join the Army band." And he was recovering from a major operation. I didn't want to be disagreeable. So I said, "Yeah, that sounds like a good idea, Dad." So he called the recruiter the next day for me.
Wow.
Unbeknownst to me.
Uh-huh.
And the guy called me back maybe a day or two later. My dad wasn't home. And I said, no, I'm not interested. He said, "Wait a minute, your dad called. He said you wanted to join." And but he was very good. He was fast. He had all the money for college and travel and everything that I wanted to do. So next thing I knew, I was, raising my right hand, swearing to defend the Constitution, and probably by far the best decision I ever made, as far as my direction to take in life. And I think my dad knew that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Maybe not apparent at the moment, but what was your experience that would, put you in a position to sit here and say, one of the best decisions I ever made?
Well, at that point in when I was very young and up through the time when my mother passed away, I was a very, by the book, follow the rules, get good grades in school. And I was really on, I think, a good path. And then after that, not so much. I started to struggle. And unfortunately, I don't blame anybody, certainly not my dad or anything, but, he had to take a second job to support my sister and I.
Yeah.
And I went from having a family of 4 to a family of 1. My sister went off to college. And so I was home by myself night and day pretty much from the time I was 14 on. And I wasn't really headed in such a strong direction. And so he recognized that, I think, and knew I needed maybe some of that structure in the military. And, when you think about some of those helping conversations and all of that too, I thrived in the military. I loved the structure. I loved the environment for the most part. And I got promoted fairly quickly. And when I became, I think, a Sergeant E5, I was a squad leader and, responsible really for things that people probably who haven't served in the military can't really even imagine. But when you're 21 years old and you're responsible for making sure that somebody knows how to not bounce their checkbook. And, you're really integrated into every aspect of their life in the military because, the term GI, government issue,
right.
You belong to the government. They don't want to see you doing things you're not supposed to do. So, at the age, I think, of 23, I can recall actually one of my soldiers calling me at 3 o'clock in the morning saying, one of our other soldiers was suicidal. They didn't know where he was. And so I was driving around, the military base at 3 o'clock in the morning at 23 years old trying to find this guy in my squad who was obviously in a very, very bad way.
Right.
And then what would I do with him when I found him? And, those kinds of things, I think, people either they adapt too quickly and take on that role of the leader and the helper or they don't, I guess. But,
right.
So, yeah.
So I'm envisioning that there are some pretty significant challenges in working with veterans just simply in engaging them. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering from the standpoint of being a helper and engaging people in the helping conversation, what are some strategies or ways of being or modalities that really guide your work and guide the work of other folks at the VOC in simply creating a safe and trusting place for people to come in and talk about some of these really challenging conversations?
Well, one of the things that I've always thought about is listening intently and listening not with the idea to respond, not waiting for my turn to talk, but actually listening and seeing what I can learn from what that person is sharing with me. When I was working specifically in homelessness, and then after that, helping veterans with their VA benefits, a lot of times they would start to tell you their story, and it would have a lot of details in it. And,
right.
And for somebody who has a heavy caseload, they might be sitting there thinking, "Come on, get to the point. I've got somebody else coming in 20
right.
minutes.
Right.
I really need to move this along." But what I think you don't realize sometimes when you're in that setting and you're stressing, how many people you need to try to work with or help, what you can lose sight of, I guess, is that you may be the only person that this person facing you has either shared their story
yes.
with, or you might be the person that they're thinking, this is the last time I'm going to tell somebody this, and if I don't get some help and some resolution, I don't have.
Yeah.
I don't have a good plan after that. And
yeah.
so I've always found that I think really listening intently, and also you realize when you do that, you glean more information than you otherwise would have if you'd rushed them through what they needed to say. And sometimes the problem that they came in presenting to you is really not the problem.
Right.
That's more of a symptom of the problem.
Right.
And when you listen and you show that compassion and respect for what they're willing to share with you, you realize there's actually a lot more under there that you can be effective in helping with, and that not only can you provide help for these specific issues, but maybe you're the person that gave them a little bit of hope when they walked out the door. And, I actually had a veteran one time who he wanted to come in and file a claim for a lung condition when I worked at the county. And I knew immediately, just based on the nature of his claim, that probably was not going to get approved by the VA. He didn't have the kind of evidence that they needed. And so I said, well, let's talk a little bit more. Tell me more about your service, more about what happened. And so he got into a lot more detail. And in the end, we ended up filing claims for mental health and for other issues that he didn't even come in to talk about. He ended up getting 100% service connected.
Wow.
And what was really remarkable about that, too, was he had just been released from prison. He'd had a pretty tough, life after the military, and he didn't have family unification. He didn't know where he was going to be staying. He didn't know how he was going to pay for things, and he knew that coming out of jail, his job options were going to be a little bit more limited.
Right.
And so, later on, he shared with me that I had, for the first time in many years, I had given him some hope. And to me, that was obviously much more valuable than the dollar amount. Well, of course, to me.
Yeah.
But then the dollar amount that we were able to help him get through the benefits he earned in the VA.
Yeah. What strikes me is two things in what you were just saying. The first is that I have this conversation with a lot of other people in the helping world that are often find themselves working in systems that don't give them the time.
Yeah.
As the helping person to be patient, to have that patient conversation. I always think of it as listening to connect versus immediately listening to understand or to problem solve.
Right.
And so how wonderful that you work in a system that supports that we need to take the time and listen deeply. But the other part you say, I had a supervisor when I was training to be a family therapist years and years and years ago, who used to always say to me, the only goal in a 50 to 60 minute session is a little something that engenders hope.
Yeah. Wow.
So everything else is gravy after that, because it's hope that brings people, they'll leave and they'll come back and they'll say, that's maybe a person that I can work with and that will help me.
Well, and I think that too, especially, for some of our veterans where, in the military, everything is dictated to you. You're told what to do, when to do it, how to do it. And when they separate, for some people, that's not a comfortable transition.
Right.
But neither was that level of, kind of dictatorship in their life. And so, it can be very difficult seeking help and maybe not wanting somebody who's going to tell you exactly what to do and how to do it, but also knowing that you need a little bit of help because things aren't going well. And I think trying to find that balance when you're working with a veteran, and the other thing I guess I think about these helping conversations is having an understanding of what that person's expectation is of you as the helper. If somebody comes in and says, I need help because my landlord is evicting me in 2 days and I don't know where I'm going to go.
Right.
You can kind of get to work on some of the logistics and the details of what the person should do and how, what next steps they can take. But when somebody needs to talk about something that's maybe not quite as clean cut as that, something that's more on the emotional side of things. I've thought before about, for example, if you ever have a child and you're struggling. I have 2 teenagers at home, so people can probably
God
relate.
Bless you.
Yeah. And so if you're struggling with your child and you call up a friend or a family member and you say, boy, I just had this interaction with my kid the other night and it was so frustrating. If they immediately start telling you, well, you need to take the phone away and you need to, you need to ground them or whatever. Well, I probably have already come to the conclusion that I need to do something different as a parent. And for whatever reason, I've discarded those ideas.
Yes.
So now I'm not as quick to want to go back to that person the next time I need help because they didn't really listen to what I was calling for. I just needed somebody to say, it's going to be okay. I know you're trying hard as a mom. These things happen and, that kind of thing. So I try to look for that when I'm having conversations, either with veterans or even with my staff, is, what's the expectation of this conversation and what do they want my role to be?
Right. And the other part I'm wondering about with that, Laura, which I think is pretty challenging for many of us helping people to do, is to not immediately go into problem-solving mode or suggestion mode. And so it goes back to your earlier point of listen deeply. What is this person looking for?
Yeah.
Or sometimes I think, what conversation are they looking to be in with me? But to take the lead from them.
Yeah, for sure. And, I had my best friend who lives in Indianapolis. Her name's Sandy. Sandy said to me one time, she said, Laura, people are called human beings for a reason. We're not called human doings, And it was kind of a funny way to phrase it, but sometimes you just need to be with people and you just need to hear what they're saying and not try to do something to fix it or do something for them.
Right. Right.
And another thing I guess I think about a lot when I am trying to help somebody with a situation is that, the old adage that people don't always remember what you said or what you did, but they remember how you made them feel. And to me, that is key. How many times are you talking to somebody and they can't remember the details of a conversation, but they can remember if they felt safe, if they felt comfortable, if they felt supported, and they will go back to that person for that reason more than, the words that person said. Right.
I also have always had this sense, I have this silly kind of metaphor in my head that I call the story of 2 chairs. And so when I train helping people, coaches and clinicians, I always ask them to think about this, that I ask people to think about a time when you were there's 2 chairs in the room and you were in the chair of the person being helped, asking for help. That usually when we sit in that chair, we have a sense that the person sitting across from us doesn't have a magic answer. The issues we struggle with as human beings are pretty complex,
Yep.
right? And so I'm just looking for someone to do what you said, listen to me, honor me. And then, especially for people in the helping world, I say, so then what happens when you stand up from that chair and go and sit in the chair of the helper, and all of a sudden you're feeling this responsibility to solve people's problems?
Right.
Because the rules that govern both chairs are the same.
Exactly.
Right? And
Yeah.
we know the reaction we get from human beings when we listen
Yeah.
and be with them is so much better and so much long lasting than I'm going to solve your problem in 5 minutes.
Right. Exactly. And I think you do feel a little bit dishonored when somebody thinks they've got a quick answer. It's like you didn't really hear how complicated this is in my life, And so that's immediately kind of discarded as neither being helpful nor even very supportive,
Yeah. So when I opened, I talked about some of the things that I had been reading that make it challenging for veterans to reach out for help and for services. What are you seeing? What are some of those things at the top of the list that just seem to make it so difficult for people to walk in and say, I need some help?
Well, I mean, I think definitely the culture of the military is not one that promotes asking for help. And I know they've done a lot of things to try to change that in recent years because of obviously the challenges that are coming to light now with veterans in the suicide epidemic and so many other issues. But it still just isn't, and it can't be. I mean, for the military to be successful, to be a fighting force that is the strongest fighting force on Earth.
Yeah.
It can't be a place where people are struggling. I mean, just to put it, I guess, bluntly. And so what happens is, there's a lot of judgment in the military. If so-and-so is going on sick call, first of all, everybody knows it. It's not private. If you're leaving to go to the doctor, it's not private. And so, people become, I think, kind of ingrained to feel that I really shouldn't ask for help, mental health help particularly.
Right.
And people are, you're called different names. I mean, I could go through a whole list of things you're called if you have any kind of physical or mental weaknesses. And so when you separate, to immediately transition to, I'm perfectly comfortable asking for help, I mean, that's not realistic.
Right.
And I can even remember, and this is a very minor comparison, but when I separated from the military in 2004, I was pregnant with my twins at the time, and I ended up getting the flu or something. And I was working in another job on post, and I went in, and my boss was like, "Why are you here?" I said, "What do you mean?" It's like, what else would I have done? And she was like, "Stay home, get well," and so it was just kind of like it never even crossed my mind to think about staying home. And so there's that. And I think another issue too for our men and women is that, unfortunately, particularly with some of the laws in New York State, and this is not my opinion of whether they're right or wrong, but with some of the SAFE Act laws, many veterans are gun owners, and they worry that if they disclose that they have any kind of post-traumatic stress or any other issue, that somebody's going to come and take their guns away.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of different reasons why people don't feel comfortable asking for help.
Right.
And so our job is really, sometimes to find the hook that's going to bring somebody in for something else, so that if there is a way that we can provide help, and get to it that way. And so, again, one of the things that I love about our new Morale Center at the Veterans Outreach Center, that, having a barbershop, having the hydro massage or chiropractic care or art groups that meet, those are all really comfortable things for people to come in and experience together, that don't necessarily, indicate that, I'm going to have to tell somebody, all my problems.
Right.
But then once they're there and they have that support and that camaraderie from others that are there with them, and they meet our staff, sometimes some of the other challenges are more comfortable in coming out.
Right. So I'm imagining that all of the folks who work for you are all experts at doing what you talked about before, of that deep listening, of just sitting and relationship building, and creating, holding. I always think about holding this safe and trusting space. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit more about how veterans get to you, Because, are people walking in off the street and saying, Laura, I'm here? Or are they being referred? Do they have a choice? Things like that.
Yeah. Well, they definitely have a choice. We're not any kind of like a court-mandated program or anything like that. Although for the veterans who are going through Veterans Treatment Court, they will work with one of our staff in that track, but that's a track that they've typically chosen because they think it's going to be more helpful to them.
And that's specific for veterans with substance use disorder?
Most often,
legal
problems
as a result
legal
of.
problems and usually involving substance use disorder. As for the rest of our clients, a lot of them are referred to us through other providers in the community. We do an awful lot of outreach. We go to the Department of Human Services. We go to other shelters. We go to a lot of different places where we think we might meet veterans. And many of them are coming in off the street.
Yeah.
They either have heard of us. They maybe heard, an ad on the radio or something like that. But I think probably a big number of our vets are coming in because another vet they knew told them they should come by. And I like that because,
that's the best.
Then you've already got maybe a little bit of trust started because they know that it's a safe place.
Yeah. That's the best. So we can talk about the helping conversation from the standpoint of work you and your colleagues do with the individual vet. I find myself always curious about the types of helping conversations someone like you uses every day to build and maintain an organization. So the Veterans Outreach Center is how many employees?
48, I think.
That's a good size.
Yeah.
And as you said at the beginning, not for profit. So what guides your work there in building and mentoring this very, very successful organization?
Well, I guess the first thing is that our staff are our biggest asset. I mean, when we look at our budget and we look at the things that we spend money on, obviously outside of programs, the thing that we spend the most money on is our staff. And so when I think about that, they're our biggest asset financially, but also our biggest asset in terms of why we're still here 47 years later and what an important mission that we have, and that they are the people who are carrying out that mission. I mean, I can't do it, on my own. And so if we didn't have not only highly qualified, but also I think healthy people that are able to carry out that mission, we wouldn't be able to do it. And so I probably do spend, I know as an executive director, you're kind of pulled in a lot of different directions. You got to be a fundraiser. You got to be the face of the organization. You got to know what's going on financially. But I bet you I spend far more than half of my time having those conversations with staff and making sure that they have the tools they need to be successful every day. And, as we went through, I think, the early stages of the pandemic when everything was kind of shutting down, a number of our staff were very uncomfortable with that, very uncomfortable with how do I serve somebody that I've always done in person? How do I be as effective in that role? How do I manage a team from afar and have virtual meetings and just in general, I think for, a lot of veterans, and of course a lot of our staff are veterans, the social distancing and the isolation wasn't healthy for people.
Does not help.
That are already struggling with PTSD and other mental health issues. And so hours and hours and hours of, conversations with people about, managing expectations and just saying, well, if you're struggling to work 9 to 5, don't work 9 to 5 then. Work 8 to noon and then work 4 to 8. So just trying to find ways to be, I think, flexible, which we do anyway. We really look for ways to be very flexible with our staff, even now that we're all, back on site again. But also to hear, again, empower them to think through challenges and problems and situations themselves. I know if I always provide the solution, then I'm going to have a team that's very dependent on me to be, their go-to resource. And what I'd really rather have is a team that develops their own solutions and problems. And so having them kind of talk through, well, what did you think, you wanted to see happen there? Or what did you expect would happen? And why do you think that didn't happen?
Right.
Some of those things I think are really keys in those helping conversations, but also, really making sure everybody knows that they bring value to the organization. It doesn't matter if you are the part-time person who is keeping the building clean, or if you're the person who's delivering program services every day, or if you're the one that's, keeping our books straight. Every person brings a lot of value to the team. And what's the value that you bring, and how can we, obviously make sure that you feel that you
Right.
you are recognized for it. I think that telling people they've done a good job is really nice, but showing it by providing, a work environment that says that in a lot of different ways, whether that's flexible work hours or providing, employee assistance programming in case they need that,
Right.
providing employee recognition programs. All of those kinds of things really speak to you're valuable to me. And I guess one last kind of thought on that. I had an employee the other day who had anticipated getting a bit of a bump up in pay. And, she had been promoted. She knew after a period of time that she might get a bump up in pay based on work performance. And unfortunately, that wasn't going to work out for
Right.
her. And so she kind of knew it was coming. She knew she wasn't going to get that raise. And so she sent me an email and, can you just tell me, am I going to get this? And I had wanted to set up a meeting with her, and she kind of wanted to avoid the meeting. And I said, well, we're not going to avoid the meeting. So she came in and she said, I just needed you to tell me, that I wasn't going to get it so I could move on. And I said, but what would that have said to you as an employee if I didn't even bother to take the time to sit down with you face to face and talk about why that didn't work out and what we see in the future as the things that can, change so that can happen next time. If all I did was send you a quick email and say, you're right, you're not going to get that.
Yeah.
That tells you you're worth about 2 seconds of my time.
Right.
And, so I think, 45 minutes later, we had a very productive, very, compassionate conversation about where we were, what we needed to do differently, and, where we were going. So
What it also says is that as the executive director, you are willing to have the difficult conversations, not just the fun ones, but you're willing to sit down face to face at a time in the world where we just love sending texts and emails, right? That you're willing to sit down face to face with somebody and have a conversation that might be, bring some uncomfortable feelings into the room, but so be it.
Well, and I think those are actually probably the most important conversations that we can have, because, I could tell you all day long you're doing a great job. But if I can't then say, but here are some areas where, I need to see something different happen,
right,
then neither one of us are in a good spot. And I guess, the other thing I think a lot about when, in terms of, having a really productive workforce and a staff who can get out there and support our veterans, is I have to have really solid and strong boundaries. I have to have boundaries around my time, but also around, what I expect from the staff. I have to be really firm on my values and where my compass tells me true north is.
Right.
And because people are going to make mistakes, they're going to deviate from what I think they maybe should be doing on a daily basis or here and there. Somebody's not going to turn in a report. Somebody's not going to send a thank you letter to a donor on time. Those are things that we can work with. When somebody violates our values and something a little bit more foundational, that's the time when we really have to have either a strong conversation about where we stand, or we have to make some other decisions. But I have to stick with that. And so having strong boundaries around, what I feel is acceptable in the workforce and what's not, and having, sometimes I think we feel like to be a compassionate leader, you've got to have these, really deep conversations with your staff. I want to know what's happening for my staff if they're having, challenges at home or whatever, but I don't necessarily need to know the details of that. I just need to know so that I can be a support to them if they need it.
Right.
And then keep those, those boundaries in place. So
right. Yeah,
it's
interesting you said that. I just had a session with a client earlier today who's a manager at an area company, and we're having this exact conversation about boundaries, of being that clarity of who I am, what I expect, and that really, I think, in leadership from a helping standpoint, that really challenging place of, as you just said, I want to know you, I want to be there, but at the end of the day, I'm executive director, and we have a job to do here, and we have an organization that needs to keep moving forward. And that might mean we can't always sit and have the, nice touchy-feely conversations.
Right. Yeah, I got a good compliment from a staff member once, and I don't think they even knew they were paying me a compliment because it was kind of folded into a conversation. But they said something that they were having a conversation with another staff member, and they said, well, of course Laura asked you those questions. She's always going to ask questions if she's worried that a client isn't getting the services they need or something to that effect. And the point was basically the mission is critical here.
Yes.
And if we keep our eyes on the mission, then we're doing the right thing. And that's what they were trying to help that other person realize, was that that's where my focus was what's our mission? Are we doing what we're supposed to be doing? And, to me, that the takeaway was that you can have those conversations all day, because that's what people need to stay focused on. And how do you have them compassionately and with support, but also, identifying that here's where you need to be and here's what I can do to help you get there.
That's right. Having them honestly.
Yeah.
I'm struck, though, that through this conversation, you bring the same perspective that you talked about earlier of when I am with a vet, that the first thing I do is I lead with listening.
Yeah.
And I lead with a belief that they have their answers, that I don't have to come up with magic ones. And I'm hearing the same theme in your work with your staff, that I listen, I empower, I view everybody as their own best resource. And that is, as the head of the organization, you don't have to be the one who has all the answers.
Right. Yeah, well, and what's funny is I think I almost never have all the answers. Because even when I think I have the answers, I don't.
Right.
And especially when you're talking to staff and you're brought a problem is brought to you and you're trying to work that out. There's so many layers usually, and you only have some of them. And so if you go into it saying, well, this is what we need to do and this is how we're going to fix it, you might have missed a few really key details. And so many times, I'll have maybe a manager come to me and say, I'm having this issue with so-and-so. And you'll first think, holy cow, that's a terrible problem to have, with another staff member. And boy, they're really wrong to do something that way. Well, then when you actually talk to that person, you find out, oh, it didn't quite go that way.
Right.
There's a little bit more detail here. So I think that I think you can be helpful to people no matter who they are, whether they're a client, a staff member, a family member. The same rules kind of apply across the board. And it's a shame that, what I'm always surprised by is how many times people are answering, or they're having those conversations, but they're just waiting for their turn to talk. You can tell it. You can tell they're getting antsy.
Yeah.
You can see their eye movement.
Which means they're not listening.
Yes,
Right.
Exactly. And it's like, if you don't really have the time for this conversation, then, we might as well not have it.
Right. Look, I'm as opinionated as the next guy, but I know, especially if I'm in a pretty good place and centered in my thinking about who I am, even in moments when I believe I have the answer, there really is no objective evidence that my answer is the answer. It's just my answer.
Exactly. And I think a lot of times too, when I'm thinking about challenges that people have had, we don't really know people as well as we think we do either. I mean, I know my sister pretty well because I grew up in the same house with her for a lot of years. But outside of that, you can have a conversation with somebody and you have no idea if, their mother held them as when they were a baby,
right.
Or if they had a person in their household when they were growing up that they were afraid of, or if they sometimes felt hungry. I mean, you don't know the intimate details of another person's life. And so when you're trying to problem solve for somebody and you're identifying, well, I don't know why they don't want to just take my advice. It's so simple. Well, it's probably not that simple. It doesn't make sense to them for one reason or another. And so trying to, let them reach their own conclusions sometimes of where they need to go is going to be so much better for everybody involved.
Right. Right. And I also think, just going back to what you were talking about in the work with individuals, how often do people just need to be heard?
Yeah.
And if they feel they were heard, even if at the end of that there's some moment of needing to agree to disagree, it's much easier to get to that moment if people simply feel heard versus somebody forced a decision on them or a perspective on them.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that too. And I think that unfortunately we don't practice that often enough. You know, even with my children, I think probably most often with my children. You know, as the mom, I'm like, well, this is what you need to do. And I had a conversation with somebody the other day about how I chose to handle a bedtime issue with my 15-year-old son. And I could tell they were like, you did what? Like, you know, you're letting him stay up how late 2 nights a week? And I thought, well, he, you know, at some point I got to loosen the reins a little bit.
Do.
And my kid isn't out, you know, doing drugs. He's not, I don't know, gambling online. He's not sneaking out of the house. If his issue is he wants to be able to stay up a little bit later, and I hold on so tight to that, I'd be better off probably letting him, you know, feel tired the next day and realize that's not how late he wants to stay up.
Good learning.
You know?
Right. Good learning.
But it's so hard to not always want to give the right answer of, no, this is what you need to do because I know better.
Right. But. Look, I think in the world of all the different people who facilitate helping conversations, the most challenging helping conversation is the one we do as a parent. Yeah. Because so much of our heart is wrapped up in that person we're doing it with. And that, I'm very comfortable saying that definitely clouds our thinking and our wisdom because it can be unbearable sometimes, right? To watch our children struggle or be in pain. And
for sure. Yeah, that is the hardest.
Yeah, right. Much easier when I don't love the person. Yeah. Much easier.
That's true. That's true.
So one of the hallmarks of a really, really good helping conversation is to be strength-based, is to help people identify their strengths, their capacities, their skills, positive characteristics. So what are some of yours that you bring to your work in helping vets, in building your organization, in supporting your staff?
Well, I think the active listening piece hopefully is something people would say about me. I also think that maybe through some of the challenges that I've experienced in my own life, one of the things I became adept at doing over the years was reading somebody else's reaction to things. And so, you know, I can usually tell pretty quickly when I'm engaged with somebody if they're getting angrier, if they're receptive to what I'm saying, if it's calming them down or ramping them up, or, you know, and I can kind of adjust fire, as we say in the military, accordingly. You know, I can, if I sense that what I'm saying is not going in the right direction, I can usually pull back a little bit and, you know, and go in a different direction. So I think, you know, being in tune with somebody else's emotions and their reactions. And then, you know, of course, also, like I said before, just having those boundaries and respect. I mean, understanding that somebody else's experiences may not be the same as mine, and their decision on how they want to, you know, handle a situation might not be the same as mine. I might not even agree with it, but if it's something that works, you know, just expressing respect for how they've decided to handle something.
Right. What's the best part for you of being the executive director of the Veterans Outreach Center?
Boy, that's a tricky question.
Maybe it's parts, not one part, parts.
Yeah, I guess my favorite. So we just had our big fundraiser, our annual gala virtually last week. And so instead of having veterans actually share their stories, you know, on stage at the convention center or whatever, we did a bunch of very short, you know, 3-minute video recordings where many of our clients would come in and some of their families even, and they would talk about the services they got at VOC. And so definitely the best part is hearing somebody say that their life improved because of the work that we did. You know, either one woman talked a little bit about having a lot of different what did she say? I'm trying to remember now how she phrased it, but a lot of ups and downs basically. And she was a mother of a veteran and talked about how the VOC was there with them through all of those ups and downs. Right. You know, celebrating the successes, dealing with some of those challenges together. And so they felt like that no matter what happened, they had a resource they could turn to where there was caring and compassion, and not somebody that was going to say, well, we're only open from 9 to 5, so we'll talk to you on Monday.
Right.
And I think, as I've said before, the idea that maybe we gave somebody hope, that maybe we were that place where they finally felt at home, and finally felt like they fit in. That's another thing a lot of veterans will say. And I think because the military experience is so unique, you don't have combat trauma anywhere else except in the military.
Right.
You might have other kinds of trauma, and
Right.
I'm not minimizing that, but you don't have combat trauma anywhere else. You don't have military sexual trauma anywhere else. And what makes that unique over, another type of sexual trauma is the dynamic that's within a military unit. I've often heard it said that when a woman is raped by one of her fellow service members, that the experience is a lot like having to tell dad that brother assaulted you.
Yeah.
Because even though they're not actually your family, that's the dynamic that you have is of a family. And the other thing with that type of situation is that there's not a civilian law enforcement agency that's going to handle that. It's your chain of command. It's the person you report to every day who's going to decide if you're more valuable than the person who committed the assault, or if they're more valuable. And their decision on how to handle that is often clouded based on all those different pieces of, who's more mission essential, who's
Right.
higher ranking, and all those kinds of things. So you don't find those pieces of unfortunately trauma anywhere else except the military. When you separate from the military, you carry that with you, but you now are carrying it with you in a very, I think, kind of lonely and isolating kind of way, because nobody you look at has had those experiences. And so you don't feel like you fit in sometimes. You feel like you're going crazy. And we've heard that so many times from veterans. And so I think that, being able to provide a place where people can come and they don't feel like I'm crazy.
Yeah.
Hey, wait a minute. There's all these other people that feel the same way as I do. I guess
Right.
I'm not crazy anymore.
Right. I'm not alone.
And so I guess those are big reasons that have me going back to work every day saying this is the right place for me.
So I'm curious, given what you just shared, this just popped into my head. Some would say that over the last few years, the whole Me Too movement at least brought the conversation a little bit more to the fore in terms of sexual trauma with women. Any sense that movement had any impact on what goes on within the military?
I guess if I'm sharing just my personal opinions and I don't have any evidence to back this up, no, I don't think so. I think that it's just there's a environment in the military that makes that kind of thing too ripe. I mean, it's too opportune. It's too difficult, or I should say, I guess, too easy for those kinds of things to be swept under the rug, to just be overlooked, ignored, and I don't think that has probably really helped anything or changed anything.
Not enough women in military leadership?
That's part of it. I mean, definitely that's part of it. But even still, I don't know if that's going to fix it. I think, my personal opinion is that when there's an allegation of a sexual assault, I do think it needs to come out of the chain of command for persecution,
right.
or at least investigation, even that,
right.
Because of course not every allegation is true. But I think that having the chain of command have that ultimate authority and power. I've read where some retired generals have said, well, if you take that authority away from the commanders, you're really challenging their overall authority and effectiveness in combat and mission readiness. I think that's a load of baloney.
I was going to say, it sounds like something a lot of men would make up.
Exactly. I didn't want to say that, but
I will.
I don't think that if you tell somebody you are not qualified to serve as, judge, jury, and lawyer on a sexual assault case, I don't think that changes whether or not people are still going to respect you when they go into battle.
Right.
They're still going to do what you've said that they need to do.
Yeah, that's a stretch. That's a stretch.
I hope that will someday change, but there's, unfortunately, a lot of old school thinking, and as long as, and I don't know if the United States will ever have a military that's 50% female. I mean, we've obviously grown tremendously, and I think now we're at like 20%. When I served, I think it was 8%. So it's been really pretty rapid, increase. But I don't think we're going to get to 50%.
Right. So. In terms of you as a leader, have there been challenges for you just from the standpoint of providing leadership that you would say are gender-based? Challenges as a leader, as a woman leader, that maybe some men leaders do not have to deal with?
I hate, not to tell you we shouldn't talk about it. I hate talking about that because I don't ever want somebody to think, well, Laura made an excuse and said that, she struggled because she was a female leader. I don't feel that I've struggled in any way. I definitely think, though, that there have been times where people have treated me in a way that they probably, wouldn't have treated a male leader.
Yeah.
And so, for example, I don't know, probably 6 years or so ago when I was working for the county, I went to a meeting, and the directors of all the veteran service agencies from the 6 or 7 surrounding counties, we'd gotten together. We wanted to talk about something jointly that we all wanted to work on. And so one of the directors arrived at the meeting, and he shook all the men's hands and he gave me a hug. And I just thought to myself, I don't need a hug. I'm not your buddy. Shake my hand. I'm a professional like you are. And things like that, where you get that little bit of a slight, like you're, I don't know. I could probably give you plenty of examples. Nothing that really changed my course or my direction at all, but just things that I thought I've had to work a little harder at that, and it's frustrating, but, we're just going to keep plowing ahead.
Right. So. How has the agency done? We were talking a little bit about this before we started recording. How have they done just through this whole pandemic?
Well, like probably almost every other nonprofit and small business out there, of course, we had some challenges this year. Our fundraising efforts were tremendously hampered. We get a lot of our fundraising happens through the summer months, where people are hosting events and they're donating the proceeds to us. And so there were no events this summer, and nobody could even do a fundraiser. So that's been a bit of a struggle, but fortunately the agency is very healthy and has been, in this community for so many years. We've had a lot of great support at the same time, and I think also with our clients. I don't want to jinx anything, but we've not had any of our clients who have tested positive for COVID.
Wow.
And when you think about the fact that we have 3 shelters, you would say, gee, having a transient facility like that, you'd really be at risk for something like that. And so we put a lot of protocols into place. And the great thing about working with military veterans, we are comfortable with protocols. We get that. And so when you tell your residents in a shelter, you guys are going to eat in 4-man firing teams tonight, they get it. They're like, okay, that's cool. We can do that. We're not going to have all 28 of you eating together. You're going to eat in groups of 4. You're going to have a battle buddy. You're responsible to obviously keep up with that person, but not the rest of the group. So we're trying to limit exposures and things like that. And now you got to start wearing personal protective, equipment and all that.
Right.
It was just like, okay, no qualms about it. So I think that definitely the veterans themselves helped make sure that, it wasn't a challenge at all.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
If somebody's listening and is considering going into the world of helping and or taking helping to the point of organizational leadership, what would be just some words of wisdom to that person as they're heading into this world?
Well, at the risk of framing it in a negative, I guess I'd have some things that not to do or expectations that might not be met. So one of the things that that I would think of is that if you're hoping that you're going to fix somebody's problems or you're going to fix somebody, that's, or if you're hoping that you're going to have a set of goals and expectations and things like that you're going to do, you might not be headed into the right profession because, unfortunately, it just doesn't really work that way. And I hear sometimes people say, and maybe it's more unique in our field because we're working with vets and people are thinking, oh, they're hardcore and they're, they're used to, a militant kind of environment. But I've heard people toss the word tough or the words tough love around. I hate that expression, actually.
Me too.
I think that that's an excuse for I didn't have any better tools in my toolbox. And so I was very aggressive with that client.
Thank you. Oh, yes. Hallelujah.
Yeah. So if you think that you're going to give somebody tough love, this is probably not the field for you. And I think too, understanding maybe what your own motivations and what is driving you to want to be in that field. I think a lot of people kind of like the idea that they're somebody's savior and that they're the person, that somebody couldn't have done without. And if that's what the driver is, that's probably going to be a letdown too. I think that, it's often a good byproduct for sure. But I think that people who go into it with that idea, they either get burned out,
Yep.
Or they get frustrated with the person they're trying to help because that person isn't recognizing their authority and their helpfulness, as much as they should. I think that if you go into a helping field, you have to really be honest with yourself about why you want to go into it and what you hope to get out of it, and what you're willing to experience. If seeing somebody's raw emotion and experiencing, their failures even after you've tried to help them is not going to be comfortable, that's probably not going to be the right place.
Right. Well, Laura Stradley, Executive Director of the Veterans Outreach Center, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service to the country, and thank you and all of the folks at the VOC for everything you do for our veterans.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks so much for having me on today, and for obviously some of the help that you've provided to our staff as well. It's made a big difference.
Well, I have had a couple of opportunities to spend a few minutes with your folks, and it is a special place. And there was the couple of times I was there, I thoroughly enjoyed the energy in the room. People liked being there and liked being with each other, and that was pretty obvious.
That's true. Yeah,
Right?
that's a good dynamic.
Yeah. Well, that's a dynamic that's created from the top. Yep. So kudos to you, because that doesn't happen automatically within an organization.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for being with us. Laura shared something right at the start of our conversation that I just want to end with, and that is that within the VA system, only 26% of vets get the services that they need. We need to do something about that. And so if you are somebody out there that has helping skills and is thinking about a place to bring those helping skills, bringing it to this specific population would be a wonderful place to do your work and to bring good listening and honor and the creation of a safe space for folks who have given so much for the freedoms that we all enjoy. So I hope you found our conversation today helpful and informative, inspiring. I know I did, and I look forward to you joining us again as we continue the conversation of exploring and celebrating the practice, art, and science of the helping conversation. Everyone be well.
We thank you for sitting in on our discussion today on just one unique version of the Helping Conversation. We would love to hear your thoughts on today's podcast, so we sincerely invite you to follow, rate, and most importantly, review our episodes. For more information on Keith Greer and this podcast, log on to keithgreercoaching.com. Please join us for our next episode as we continue the exploration and celebration of the practice, art, and science of the helping conversation.